is the Miller philosopher. When I took counseling and psych classes in college, one of the most important things they tried to impart was the importance of understanding why a person felt the way they did, or why they took the actions that they took. It wasn't enough just to black and white the situation by saying it was that they were evil or that they're good. One of the methods they used to try to teach us this was by having us watch shows and movies to see what characters said and or did, and then go back and rewatch them to pinpoint why. What sparked the change? What was the moment where they switched from one side to the other, or set them on that path? And this has been my approach to most of the videos on this channel. But one of the most difficult subjects I've had trying to apply this has been that of Melkor, Middle-earth's literal root of all evil. In many videos, when delving into this particular Valar, I have described him as a narcissist with the powers of a near god. A being who was so self-centered that he would rather destroy everything else that others made or represented what others made than that they exist at all. But I was never able to really pinpoint the specific point as to why he was that way. And it was something I've always wondered. Sauron, for the most part, was pretty simple in comparison. He liked order, and for the most part, the Valar weren't exactly being orderly in how they went about doing things. So then, what was it about creation that drove Melkor to an insanity that was nearly god level? So then, I read The Nature of Middle-earth and its section on the Valar and Melkor. And I think I finally got a handle on the reasons and the moment about what drove Melkor to become the evil monster that he's known for among Tolkien fans and with those characters within the stories. In essence, Melkor is the mad artist, supremely gifted and burning with a desire to express himself in his creations. What made Melkor such a threat wasn't his powers, but the gifts in his mind, rather. Before his fall, Melkor was ever curious and gifted in unorthodox thought, thinking outside the box, as it were. What others just accepted as a general rule, he would ask why and basically explore variations to that rule. What else could be done with a box? How else could you have a deer run? Or how big can you make a mountain other than its normal size? Etc., etc. There is an implication that Uru made Melkor, along with Aule, to be the engines of creation, as it were. Both had a great desire to create that was more so than the others, and were gifted in that of imagination and craft. Yet, it was Melkor's perception that made him a near genius at it, able to understand the nature of how the other Valar's powers and abilities worked, and then somewhat at least replicate them himself, the exception being Umo and his authority over water. Like many artists, Melkor's gifts also led him to seeking perfection. In fact, I would say that he was possessed more so by the idea of perfection than actually achieving perfection in and of itself physically. So, when The Nature of Middle-earth says that he was never satisfied with his own work and that it's that drive, Melkor's own secret fire, if you would, that it's talking about. The fire of an artist, that of someone who is desperate and trying to create something and ever trying to perfect it, and yet for some unknown reason to themselves, never fully is satisfied with it. However, the problem, the red line, was a gradual one that he just slipped into rather than someone like Ainur, who went mad after one specific event in his life. The passion given to him by Uru, the fire, consumed him more and more, and this expresses itself in how he begins to alter and change the work of his peers, rather than just anything that he did, Aule in particular. Which makes me think, actually, that Melkor saw Aule as more of a rival than a brother, which he arguably should have done. Aule was perhaps maybe not the biggest threat to him, but the one that irritated him the most because he was the one in which he was most like. The fire within Melkor raged out of control, and like any out of control fire, the more out of control it gets, the more violent it becomes. Melkor starts to become frustrated because there's always one element that he lacks insight into: the reason for being, their purpose. The concept is completely alien to Melkor, and therefore he can't see it. And this is perfectly embodied in the Uru's secret fire. And Melkor can't replicate it, and the more he can replicate it, the more frustrated he gets, which becomes anger, then hatred, and then eventually becomes extreme narcissism. What started out as, quote, no small love for things not created by himself becomes an uncontrollable hatred, consuming him so much to the point where even Melkor's own modifications no longer satisfy him. The pursuit of perfection at work, but now to a psychotic degree. It's no longer enough to perfect his own creations and try to make something of his own, but now he has to do that with other people's as well and take that from them. Ultimately, it's this fire to create that devolves into this extreme narcissism that in order to satisfy his pursuit of that perfect creation, Melkor wants to now control everything. It's the only way that he can remotely satisfy this drive, this artistic need, even though he never will. Nothing would. It's very much like Ungoliant, actually, and her need to consume light to the point where she can no longer control it herself and basically, if the silmarillion is correct, ate herself alive. And in a way, you can also argue that Fëanor was somewhat similar to this as well, given that when he finally dies, there is no body to take back or to bury because the inner fire that was within the spirit consumes it and turns it to ash, basically. This also would explain why Melkor felt such disdain for life that he felt the need to destroy it, to kill others, because he could not fathom the concept of purpose, and because he could not penetrate how the secret fire worked, nor find it for that matter, he therefore saw creatures and objects as the same thing. Everything was an object to be possessed and owned by him, in one way or another. Elves weren't alive. Dwarves weren't alive, and even more so didn't even matter, being an afterthought. Humans weren't living beings. Everything that existed in Middle-earth, from the smallest insect to the greatest mountain range, were just canvases, great sheets of paper on which others had already written or painted upon, but none of them by Melkor's own hand. He could only add addendums or smash them to pieces, because the mere sight of them reminded Melkor of the desire that he was always pursuing something but could never find and would never find. And as for his peers, the Valar and the Maiar, they were just rival lesser artists in his mind, whom did not even deserve the right to anything of which Melkor himself was made for and gifted at. They were too obedient, too constrained by the rules, and had no creativity that was perfect. And more to the point, they were not made by him, and therefore he could not control them, which perfectly outlines the previous points. The Silmarillion actually outright says all this when it describes how now Morgoth started the War of the Dagor Bragollach with the Noldor during the latter parts of the First Age, that the beauty of Ard Gallen and its green fields that surrounded his realm while Angband was besieged drove him crazy, it drove him mad, so much so that it prompted Melkor to act rashly and move up the timetable ahead before he was well and truly ready to strike. So, in essence, this kind of puts a new importance, if you will, on that specific event. That Ard Gallen wasn't just a piece of land that Melkor wanted burned to ashes, or that was responsible for hemming him in up north. Ard Gallen was the constant and physical reminder of that which drove Melkor mad in the first place long before any of this was ever made. And, like any mad artist, they smashed a mirror when they hate the reflection. But having said all that, let me know your thoughts on this below. Otherwise, this is the Miller Philosopher, and you guys have a good day.